Okay. Okay, very important soccer match is going on right now. And as you know, soccer is a thing of passion. But you know what? I retired from Catholic University of Korea last year, and I lost the passion actually, so I lost interest in soccer, so I'm okay. But many of you will miss the match, right? And today we have 3 presenters and 3 discussants. And we are going to talk about the conflict and disorder, instability, as well as the ways to restore order and kind of institutionalizing relations in Northeast Asia, particularly among South Korea, China, and Japan. And as you know, there is a kind of there has been undergoing change in the structure of trilateral relations, but several years ago there was kind of leadership change in the United States, Japan, and South Korea. So there's a kind of combination of factors affecting the relationship among 3 countries. So we are going to talk about those factors, the changes and the continuation of relations among Korea and China and Japan. So we are going to have 3 presenters. First, Kawashima Shin from University of Tokyo. Give up applause. Okay, Kim Sunil from Gyeonggi University. And Oh Seung-hee from Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Okay. And also we have 3 discussants. The first, Yoon Dae-yeol from Daejeon University. Okay. And Kang Soo-jung from Joseon University. And Son Dae-kwon from Seogang University. Oh, okay. So we are going to give 15 minutes for presenters and also 10 minutes for discussants. And we have actually very excellent 3 discussion papers. Of course, our presenters have prepared very good presentation. So we are going to start with Kawashima Shin, Professor Kawashima Shin. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. Yes, this is my great opportunity to be here to discuss this topic with you. And also, this is very, very, rare experiences that everybody goes to see soccer. Anyway, yes, South Africa, Japan also has experience to make game with South Africa. South Africa is a very, very tough team, actually. Yeah, we know. So, and also the World Cup is also interesting. So now that ROK, Korea and South Korea and Japan share this experience, yeah, we are so enthusiastic to applause, cheer its own team. This atmosphere is also is preparing both ROK and Japan. That's the same situation. Yes, Japan also tomorrow has the game. We have game with Sweden.
Sweden.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Good luck.
Yeah. But anyway, the organizer. So my PPT is in this volume, page 127. Yes, 127. So the organizer gave me one topic as the relationship between among ROK, Japan, China. So my title of this presentation is just achievement and challenges in Japan and China, Japan, South Korea, and Japan, China, South Korea relations. This is my topic. Yes, and today's presentation has these 3 parts. Okay. And at first, I'd like to summarize. So first, I will summarize my presentation, because the time is not enough. First of all, yes, as the moderator said, we are now facing with the international orders change, and also the regional situation is also facing with a big challenge. Yeah, but how do we cope with these changes in the international field and the regional field? First of all, the role of the USA in international politics has changed drastically and significantly, raising question of how to maintain existing world order, regional order, and adapt them to a new era. In this regard, Japan and the ROK will need to cooperate as middle power. Yes, we are now facing with USA's change. So this very, very significant change of USA stimulates us, ROK Japan, to change these relations. We must keep good relations now. And secondly, on the security field, the war in Ukraine, or Russia's aggression toward Ukraine, has brought to light a new type of the war we know requires countries to respond accordingly for this new war, like drone, AI, and so on. At the same time, U.S. policy towards its allies is shifting as a big change, and the U.S. allies are being called upon to address the situation autonomously while cooperating with one another. ROK and Japan share common ground on this issue as well. And East Asia, as China's military and economic power becomes overwhelming, international politics surrounding the ROK, Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait are fraught with tension. Japan, ROK, and China are faced with the challenge of how to maintain regional peace and stability. It's a big point. Fourth, on the economic front as well, economic security has come to be, important. Making it impossible to maintain so-called separation of politics and economies. Nevertheless, ROK, Japan, China have continued to cooperate despite their differing political systems. The challenge now is how to build cooperative relationship based on the remaining economic independence. We know. We are now facing with the economic security, AI, many problems. But we still have some economic cooperation in this region. How do we explore the new types of the separation of the economy and the politics to advance cooperation? So, moderator said we can find some continuity and change. So continuity is just we are sharing the economic cooperation, but the change is so clear. Warfare, state warfare, USA, and so on, so many things. Yes, the first of all, the Japan-China, first part. Everybody knows the atmosphere or circumstances of security situation is changing drastically in this 10 years or 15 years. First, USA's policy toward us, allies. We know. And as I said, warfare itself, nature of the warfare has also changed under East Asia situation. Everybody knows. So the Japan is compelled or must update its own security policy according to these new situation. Last month, PM Takaichi went to Vietnam and launched the updated Free and Open Indo-Pacific. This concept contains security, economy, and social, and so many things. But anyway, this also is advanced, revised, or adjusted according as a new security and other situation. Secondly, Japanese government is now preparing a new documents, 3 documents of the security. Takaichi administration will launch this new documents on December this year, the end of this year. And thirdly, Japan adjusted the original principle on security policy, like 3 principles on arms export and so on, to advance the network and cooperation with other countries to to cope with the new situation. Okay, USA's problem and China's expansion and so on. So Japan adjusts its policy on the OSA, not ODA, OSA and others to provide some warms or some coast guard ships towards Philippines and Indonesia and so on to enhance its military capability or the maritime security capability and so on. This is the Japanese role as middle power. Yes, under the pressure of the USA's changing and also so on. Yeah, this is the case. This we know what is the change of the East Asia. For Japanese point of view, we know this North Korea situation, Russia situation, we know. However, from Japanese point of view, China's change is so important, actually. For example, now that China has 3 aircraft carriers, and their operation has already gone beyond first island chain, and their operation has reached to the second island chain. So now that Okinawa and Taiwan, these first island chain were sandwiched by PLA from east and west, both. This is a new situation, actually. Japan does not have any military facilities on the second island chain. What do we do, actually? It's a new situation. So Takaichi is compelled to change and adjust its own policy now. This is also the same thing. Yeah, I will cost that. Then how about the public opinion? Yeah, in Japan, both Japan and China, it does not like the other side. Yeah, we know. But the point is, in Japan, more than 60% of Japanese recognize China is important for Japan. Mostly because of economy. But in China, recently, Chinese people does not recognize Japan is important for China. It's a big change, I think. So this is the initiation, I remember. How about the economy? Okay, this is the FDI from Japan to China. Yeah, FDI from Japan to China is decreasing. And there's 10 years, but yes, it is clear. However, China is still one of the largest economic partner for Japan, top 2. And also there are 20,000 Japanese companies in China. So we still have the strong economic cooperation, economic ties, I think. Yes, we know we have so many problems, security, economy, so on. Yeah, this is a tourist problem. I skip it. Yeah, I skip it. Yeah, only one thing about Taiwan. Yeah, because there are so many misunderstandings. Yeah, after the Takaichi's statement at the Congress in the November 7th last year, yeah, China criticized Japan so strongly and so on. But anyway, December 3rd last year, at the upper house of Japan, Takaichi said, Japanese government's basic position on Taiwan is as set forth in 1972 Japan-China joint communique, and there has been no change, okay, whatsoever to this position. So Takaichi said, Japanese policy toward Taiwan has not changed. Yeah, so this is a point. But we know Chinese propaganda is different. so as I said, yeah, Japan is now updating military security policy But as I said, in order to cope with some new war, USA's change, and so on, however, China criticized Japanese policy, as new militarism. It's a very interesting situation. But anyway, it's so crucial in China-Japan relations. Yeah. How about the Korea-Japan? I know you are a specialist. Yeah, or the professor also here, so she's also a specialist. But anyway, in this couple of years, Korea's, Japan's sentiment towards the other side is getting better and better. That's a very, very interesting. Yeah. So especially younger people in Japan really like ROK, South Korea. Is a new situation. And the top leader summit, wow. Yeah, there's so many good pictures, right? Yeah. Glasses and the drums and so on, everything. Yeah. However, ROK Japan, this better relations has many challenging, I think. Yeah, we know the atmosphere is good. National sentiment is also getting better and better. However, what is the real, concrete cooperation? We don't know the detail of the cooperation. Yeah, last administration, our country, also mentioned President Yoon Suk-yeol mentioned about the India-Pacific strategy for freedom, peace, and prosperity in 2022. And also at the Camp David, at the summit among ROK, US, Japan, 3 leaders mentioned about the peace and stability of Taiwan Strait. But how about President Lee Jae-myung? He does not mention it. So is it change your policy or not? And that's so many things. So what is the real concrete cooperation? What are the details of the cooperation? This is one of the problems. However, we think, especially in the security field, we are accustomed to be under the so-called US-centered hub-and-spoke system. Okay, we have security treaty with USA. ROK Japan, the bilateral relations does not have so-called security treaty. Yes, so I think the situation at present is a new one. We have not experienced. So we can advance step by step, one by one, to explore the new point of advanced cooperation. Under this situation, it is so interesting. On May and last month at the Japan and South Korea summit, both leaders mentioned the new topic, one concrete point of the cooperation. This is energy supply chain. 2 leaders concurred to launch a Japan-ROK cooperation initiative and jointly explore the tangible action to contribute to securing energy supply chains. It's an example, one of the step by step. So I hope that we piled these cases to advance cooperation. How about the 3 countries? We know the Trilateral Cooperation Office is located at ROK, Seoul, right here. So that office is advancing so many cooperation and meetings. We know this is also okay. This organization must advance it much more. But especially for the activities, we can find the other opportunities to advance the cooperation. We know, everybody knows these 3 elements of international politics. First is power, military. Second is economy. Third is values. Can we advance? Can these 3 countries advance a military cooperation? It's a little difficult. Okay. How about the value? Wow, it's also challenging. But the economy, maybe provides some chances for us. Okay. So, however, as I said, we are now facing with so many problems like economic security, AI, and so on. However, as I said, these three countries still have a so-called mutual independence situation. Yeah. So how do we explore a new style of the cooperation under the pressure of the economic security? This is a new challenge, I think. And also everybody knows aging issues, population issues, and so many social welfare and so on. South Korea's situation is much more serious than Japan, I think. Taiwan also. So many. So it's and also environmental issues. Yeah. So we can advance this cooperation much more, I think. So, and also the military and the security field is so difficult for us, however. How do we keep the peace and stability in this region? So we can advance something at least. First of all, one example is we can advance the mechanism of exchange of information, of communication under the emergency. Okay, so we know ROK and China have a series of the mechanism on the exchange of emergency to control the escalation of the situation. Japan, China also have some of mechanism. So how do we form the new types of triangle mechanism of exchange information to keep the stability or to control the escalation of the emergency? This is a very lowest level. However, under this situation, it is possible. We can be endeavor to set this level of cooperation mechanism level, I think. So today I talk about these three elements, and also my conclusion has already talked here. So I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kawashima. He's presented recent development in 3 countries, and also he talked about future prospect and how to advance cooperation among 3 countries. And particularly he emphasized economic cooperation. So I think he gave a very good stimulus to our discussion. So I really anticipate, the discussion by Professor Yoon. And next, we are going to have Professor Kim Sun-il from Kyung University, and you also have 15 minutes maximum. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Che. And so I'm Sun-il Kim of the College of Mineral Studies at Kyung University, and it's my honor to be here. And I believe this is the largest room in the conference venue, and filled with the large audience, and I'm a little quite nervous about that. Okay, so my observation and the talk is in line with Professor Shin's observation that there's something kind of continuing change in the international order in Northeast Asia, as well as the profession also underscored the significance of domestic aspects. So let me begin with this. Oops. Let me begin with this picture. So I asked the Gemini to create an image of what Trump has been doing over the past years, and the Gemini came up with this great picture in just less than 10 seconds for free. And so we all know that Trump has been kind of disrupting the global order, and there's no doubt about that. And there have been many debates, both in the academia as well as in the media, about the relation between the Donald Trump administration and the world order, both in the liberal camp and the conservative camps. And so by reviewing them, I was able to identify two competing views that might be the beginning of this presentation. So the question is whether the Donald Trump, the second administration, mean an accidental but qualitative rupture in the international order, or it is something about a continuation of the ongoing and fundamental changes in the international order or disorder, particularly in the Northeast Asia. And then how those two competing views see the trilateral relationship and what might be the prospect for the regional stability. And if the current order or disorder is structured, how can a kind of rule or value-based order be restored? Because the grand title of this panel is about the prospects for restoration. So whether we can think of any sort of restoration. So the two conventional views, the first one is that the Trump administration is nothing but a kind of break from the previous and existing international order. So I named it the disruptive deviation thesis. And another view is about the continuity and acceleration thing. So Trump has accelerated the ongoing changes. In other words, Trump is nothing but a symptom, not a cause of the structural disintegration of the previous international order. And yesterday, Professor Acharya presented a similar view about that. He told that Trump is not an origin, he is a consequence of the change. But his view is a little bit different from my understanding. But my view, as a preview, is that the two views might not be mutually exclusive. So it might be a contingent outcome of the interaction between structure and agencies, simply operating at different levels. So let me give a brief introduction to the disruptive deviation view. And so they argue that Trump exhibits a qualitative but accidental break with the previous international order. And under that understanding, the allies actually pushed for the strategic response, and the change compels the United allies, including Japan and South Korea, to hedge against the risk. And so at the end of the day, after Trump is replaced by another liberal leader, then they argue that we will be able to restore the existing international order. But there may be the legacy of Trump. So Trump's term maybe make some lasting impact. But at the end of the day, so we will be able to restore the international order. But the other group of scholars and journalists argued that the order had already broken before the rise of Donald Trump. The post-Cold War order was already eroding for structural reasons, and Trump is nothing but a symptom and accelerant rather than the cause of the breakdowns. And they argue that the US-China rivalry, so-called the G2 rivalry, has been the independent variable that drives the change. And the agencies, including the East Asian nations, responded, but the post-Trump, even though we have a new leader in Washington, the changes are continuing. So the agencies may have the difficult time to adjust the ongoing changes. And so let me give my assessments. So disruptive and continuous change views. So they basically aptly pointed out the structural disruptions, which are really real and severe. But what you can see is that actors have been able to adapt to the changes. So the change may be consequential, but manageable so far, depending on regions and issue areas. So it might neither be a kind of pure rupture nor a pure continuity. And the changes depends on the regions and issues, which will give us some kind of room to maneuver and think about the responses and the hopes to restore the new order in the region. And I think that those two views are just looking at the different levels, so that we can find a continuity at systemic level. The change definitely has been driven by the growing G2 competition, but at the same time, the international order was visibly framed before the rise of Donald Trump. And at agency level, yes, we can also observe a variance, the discretionary and transactional behavior of the agencies, particularly those of the United States during the Trump's presidency, have altered the expectation of allies and adversaries, and the agencies have responded differently. And the question is, if we accept this view, what might be the implication for the Northeast Asian trilateral, the China, Japan, and South Korea? And that will lead us to the next topic, the trilateral, the status of the trilateral. So let's begin with the proposal of looking at the trilateral, because the trilateral can serve as a test case for these views. It allows us to examine the views, and so the time is taking, so let me fast forward it. And the rupture and deviation views see that the trilateral's function has changed under the Donald Trump, because it has changed from a low-stake economic talk shop to a strategic hedge against the United States unreliability. And the allies would use the trilateral to preserve economic coordination with China, as their security ties to the United States has frayed, and it conditioned So at the end of the day, they argue that the new equilibrium would emerge. So there might be a kind of growing institutional density in the trilateral, which may be able to replace the United States, Japan, South Korea security trilateral. But those who underscore the continuing aspects of the international order, they argue that despite the rise of Donald Trump and the regime changes in the United States, the East Asian trilateral nations have been kind of experiencing kind of the series of ruptures and cooperation. So we can find a recurring patterns. So the China, South Korea, and Japan on historical issues, and the China, South Korea, and Japan on the security issues. And even though these trilateral summits have been operative for some years, but which was discontinued for some years, but it has not served as the stable base for cooperation or something. And the new disorder has already been in place, they argue, and particularly because of the strong basis of nationalism in East Asian nations, the colonial memory and domestic politics remain capable of reversing the pull toward the liberal international order. So this is a kind of summary of the competing view on the trilateral from those two competing perspectives, in terms of their understanding of the drivers of change and the nature of the rapprochement and the recent rapprochement and the prognosis. Let's skip this. What I can find is that we can also find some autonomy within structural constraints, particularly among the middle powers, the Japan and South Korea. So they have operated simultaneously across three trilaterals, anchoring deterrence through the U.S., Japan, South Korea alliance, preserving the trilateral while preserving the trilateral as an economic counterweight, and also keeping the China, Russia, North Korean alignment a little bit loose. And the functional interdependence did play out. The functional context of trilateral cooperation is continuous, but and at the same time, the stakes have risen under the Donald Trump administration, so the cost of letting trilateral cooperation collapse gets higher, and the cost of over-investing in it is also higher. That's why we are kind of talking about the trilateral cooperation at this time again. And the middle powers have, in some sense, managed to kind of survive and maintain some kind of the basis of cooperation among the trilateral nations. But as I underscored, the changes differ across regions and issue areas. And so the prospects may be dependent on whether Japan and South Korea can convert this episodic series of convergences into durable institutions. So an open and contingent question may be required. So let me move on to the final, part of the presentation, which is about the prospect. But I have to admit that so this is something like a kind of the boilerplate. So because we are still living under the Donald Trump, the strong influence of Donald Trump, and the war is still going on somewhere in the world, and the international order has been kind of disruptive. So, but I do maintain my belief in the institutions, so please allow me to give my 2 cents about the prospect of rebuilding the trilateral cooperation in the region. So regardless of perspective, the building shock-resistant cooperation is essential, and there is no doubt about that. And that will allow us to revisit the primary goal of the trilateral cooperation. We do know that we need peace and co-prosperity, economic co-prosperity in the region. So all 3 nations may kind of agree upon the shared goals, even though the ways in which we can realize the goals may be different, and the preserving peace through the decoupling economics from the security dilemma. So all 3 nations may agree upon that, and we may have to ring-fence the economic and social cooperation from security disputes so that the progress is not held hostage to security issues. It's kind of textbook statement. And also we need to kind of pool the resources for crisis. We have learned a kind of big lesson from the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the area of public health, disaster response, and environment protection, and human security, et cetera. We need to pool the resources. And we need a building block against the reversal of cooperation that can survive electoral cycles of individual nations. So but to realize this goal, we may need some principles to initiate the cooperation, which also can serve as the fundamental basis of the cooperation. And also there are 2 views about the foundations of cooperation. One is about the value, and the other one is about the rule. So the rebuilding the trilateral cooperation based on the principle of value-based order, and which became a kind of buzzword some years ago. But the value-based order, which presupposes a shared normative community, such as a liberal democracy or rule of law or human rights. But the problem is that, as we all know, in the trilateral, China may be structurally precluded if we adopt the value-based kind of the principle to build cooperation among the nations. And China, on the other hand, may prioritize the matter of historical justice, which is also a value, which will potentially marginalize Japan's position in the trilateral. Then an alternative principle might be the rule-based order. So rule-based order, which is procedural and functional, and predictable rules of conduct and dispute management mechanism and reciprocity may serve as the basis of cooperation. And I believe it might be the only form that can inclusively contain all 3 states in the trilateral. But the problem is, what rules? Do the rules always align with the real political interest of individual nations? And also, we have to ask whether an equitable trilateral rule book available in the middle of growing power asymmetry among the trilateral nations. And for example, in the case of international law and in principles, the issue of Taiwan, the cross-strait issue, it becomes very tricky because China claims that, well, it's based on the international law and the principles. Then my take is that whatever value-based or rule-based or the public goods should be provided. And as I underscored, yes, all 3 nations agree upon that the trilateral is the body of a multilateral coalition, or using some reasons, the buzzword, the minilateralism, to ensure effective provisions of public goods in the region in time of absence of hegemonic players in the region, and the security, so another peace, and economic co-prosperity or cooperation might be the normative as well as pragmatic goal that may bind the trilateral countries. But also, we may have to admit that there are two tricky issues in the region, the North Korea and Taiwan. So we have to decide whether we are going to make North Korea denuclearize and getting Taiwan to abandon independence, or we let North Korea retain a nuclear arsenal for self-defense and make Taiwan not simply a de facto, but de jure sovereign nation state. Will the three countries we will ever share the goal, even in pragmatic terms? That's going to be a big challenge. And in addition to that, by the way, I'm the comparatives that I'm kind of interested more in the domestic issues than the international cooperation. But anyway, the economic nationalism has been the primary challenge to build the trilateral cooperation in the regions. The economic nationalism, not only in East Asia, but globally, economic cooperation has been hinged on economic nationalism in all three of the trilaterals. And the economic nationalism is strong enough to stymie security cooperation under the righteous banner of the economic security, which justifies the government's policies of individual governments' policies of mercantilism and the export control and countermeasures have been really used and adopted by individual nations, and there is a rising protectionist concerns, both in Japan and South Korea, let alone China. And the nationalist turn has been the basis of the change, in addition to the growing the G2 competition. And we all know that the recent nationalist turn is a political backlash rooted in growing inequality, migration, anxiety, and stated threats, resulting in the right-wing nationalist surges not only in the United States, but Asian nations as well. And it leads to the neo-mercantilist revival, and techno-nationalism, weaponization of economy, and cyber-populism, etc., have been widely observed in East Asian nations. So the change that became apparent is that during the first Trump administration, those changes are now visibly present in all three trilateral societies. China, we can find the state-channel nationalism and patriotism, and Japan, and we all know that there's a recent anti-immigration and a populist surge. And South Korea, in the middle of intense political polarization, there's a persistent anti-China, anti-Japanese sentiments. And then those things, however, they're now simply covered up by the words of pragmatism. All three nations, China, Japan, and South Korea, all governments are officially embracing the idea of pragmatism. But the pragmatism, I think, is nothing but a kind of cover-up of the nationalism, the crude nationalism. So this is the real boilerplate. And so let me really briefly present my view. So logically, we may have to start out of scratch with some available options, the anchoring order in low politics cooperation, and we have to densify and depoliticize institutional formats. And the Japan and South Korea should play as order makers, not simply not simple order takers. And then we may think of the potential, the operative sequence, the anchoring deterrence through the alliance, because we have to admit that the Japan and South Korea are the allies of the United States. We cannot disregard that. And while we have to, at the same time, simultaneously preserve economic coordination through the trilateral as a counterweight. And we also have to keep the China-Russia-North Korean alignment loose and costly rather than allowing it to harden into a bloc. And we have to de-risk the economic, that decoupling from the growing influence of China in the region, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is my final the take. So, but at the bottom of this change and the problems, I think the domestic issues are the foundations. So we definitely have to, all three nations have to address the domestic roots as a kind of structural fix. So disorder is a backlash and durable restoration that requires reducing its fuel. The inequality mitigating policies and humane managing migration regimes and credible answers to the dislocations are required. And we have to invest in the social foundation for reconciliations. And track to diplomacy can be suggested as a solution. And then, so let me skip this. Okay. And so let me underscore that again. So the order restoration is a kind of domestic project. So we start from the domestic reform or the envisioning some kind of the project to restore the international or the trilateral cooperation from the home. So even the best designed regional architecture is reversible if the members of trilateral nations cannot blunt nationalism at home. So restoring domestic political viability of international cooperation in three societies are the most essential and critical thing. That's my final take. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's amazing. You know, the Professor Kim volunteered at the last moment to save this session. He not only wrote very good presentation, but also he had a lot to talk about. So Trump 2.0 is, whether it is a deviation or not, power vacuum is being created, and three countries, Korea, Japan, China, has to work together to restore order and stability. So he talked about a lot of measures, and we are going to have very good, very interesting discussion later. And next, we are going to have Professor Oh Seung-hee, and she also prepared very interesting presentation. So you have 15 minutes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Seung-hee Oh, an assistant professor at KNDA. It is a great honor to present here. And actually, our previous presenter already said that it is the historical day, and also today is also the day the Korean War broke out, the June 25th. So it is the very important and historical moment to think about the East Asian international order and the trilateral relations among China, Japan, and Korea. Today, I'd like to share my ideas on the Sino-Japanese conflict and strategic implications for the Korea Peninsula. Yeah, the last year, on November 7, the Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae raised before the Budget Committee the possibility of invoking collective self-defense rights in a Taiwan contingency, characterizing it as an existential crisis situation for Japan. And this single statement triggered a comprehensive and multi-domain Chinese responses exposing deep structural tensions. So there are a lot of China's retaliation against this remark, and high-level diplomatic exchanges are effectively suspended. And the planned the last year's Korea-China-Japan trilateral summit postponed, and the regional multilateral cooperation disrupted. So I'd like to see this, the recent Sino-Japanese conflict with the perspective from the historical periodization. So I think I can divide the previous Sino-Japanese historical relations into 6 parts. From 1894 and to in the 1945. So the first phase, the hegemony competition. So there was the first Sino-Japanese war in 1894, and then 1945 there was the end of the World War II, and then 1972 there was the Sino-Japanese diplomatic normalization. And the 1989, it is the end of the Cold War. And the 2001 is the start of the power transition between the two countries. And after COVID-19, there is a new moment to present. There is a order competition, so there are some changes. We can think the bilateral relations from the structural and change in the bilateral relations. So I'd like to see the recent trilateral relations from the perspective of bilateral relations as well as the trilateral structures. So we can think about the China-Japan relations and the U.S.-China relation and U.S.-Japan relations. And also we can think of the U.S.-Japan-China trilateral structures. Under this background, there is also the Japan's domestic politics and China's domestic politics, and the main issue is Taiwan factor. Under all of this background, Korea, the situation in this region can have an impact on South Korea, and also South Korea tried to have need to find some strategic approach under all the backgrounds. So that is my framework to see the Sino-Japanese relations and Korea's strategic implications for South Korea. So the Takaichi statement was the approximate trigger, not the cause. So I'd like to see more from the structural interpretation. So we can think about the perspective and more structural perspective, and we can think about short-term logic and mid-term logic and long-term logic. So China preemptively constraining a new pro-Taiwan cabinet before Japan's security trajectory solidify, and the short-term logic. And for the midterm logic, accumulated Chinese anxiety over Japan's gradual military role expansion since the Abe era, a new crossing a perceived threshold. And for the long-term logic, the structural library for regional order leadership. So we can think about Japan's Tatsengo, the post-war exit. So, and also China's defense of the 1945 settlement. And also we can find some paradox of Chinese pressure in the recent China-Japan relations. After the recent election in Japan, the Takaichi cabinet won the supermajority despite Chinese pressure. So Chinese coercion paradoxically consolidates domestic support for security build-up and constitutional revision of Japan. So the key finding is Chinese coercive pressure has not destabilized the Takaichi cabinet, but it has strengthened it. It's kind of the paradox of Chinese pressure, and I'd like to put more focus on this situation. So implications for Korea. So we can think about the diplomatic impact and dual pressure dilemma for structure and mediators dilemma. The Sino-Japanese conflict operates within a larger U.S.-China strategic competition framework, creating a compound crisis environment in which the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, and Korean Peninsula security issues are mutually entangled. Also, there is mediator's dilemma for Korea. So while there are expectations for Korea to play a balancer or mediator role among middle powers, In highly politically sensitive domains such as Taiwan, security, and military affairs, failure to secure genuine mediation capacity exposes Korea to strategic pressure from both sides. So Korea's foreign policy must pursue the dual objective of defending the alliance and managing relations with China, a very high difficulty strategy environment where consistency and priority setting capacity are the key variables. So the cost of maintaining strategic ambiguity is rising, and delayed positioning risks being interpreted as lack of reliability by both sides. And there are also impacts in security and economic areas. For security, there is extended deterrence linkage, and also we can think about the USFK strategic flexibility. And there is North Korea's calculation. So prolonged Sino-Japanese conflict may alter Pyongyang's strategic incentive structure, requiring Korea to integrate regional dynamics into its DPRK policy. Also, in economic area, we can also have both a structural vulnerability and also the structural opportunity in the recent Sino-Japanese conflict. So the Sino-Japanese conflict accelerates the weaponization of strategic resources, the rare earths and semiconductor materials and dual-use items, deepening the fusion of economic and security logics. So we can think about the 5-dimensional response strategies, and diplomacy is in institutionalized buffer diplomacy for Korea, and in security, the linkage risk management and escalation prevention. For economically, we can think about the supply chain stabilization and strategic opportunity. For domestically, social foundation of foreign and security policy. And the regional architecture, the middle power-led Northeast Asian order concept. The institutionalized Korea as indispensable coordinator on Korean Peninsula issues. But we can also leverage the function of TCS and also build self-reliance, and at the same time, we need to build self-reliance and alliance with the United States and the value-based solidarity architecture. So it is very important for Korea and a new task for Korea to build a regional architecture with the more advanced global status in the region. And the 3 questions for scholarly discussion, we can think about the order transition theory, and also the limit of coercive statecraft, and the middle power agency under structural polarization. So the core theoretical proposition is the Sino-Japanese conflict is best understood not as bilateral friction, but as a systematic legitimacy contest over the post-1945 East Asian order, with Korea positioned at the intersection of competing order narratives. To conclude, the conflict is not a diplomatic incident, but a structural coalition rooted in incomparable visions of the post-war East Asian order. So short-term, the escalation windows exist, the fundamental resolution does not. So I think the recent Sino-Japanese conflict can be understood not episodic, but structural change in the East Asian order. And the second, I think the coercion paradox of China is very important to read the recent Sino-Japanese relations. China's comprehensive retaliation has accelerated precisely the security trajectory is to deter, reinforcing the domestic legitimacy of Japan's military buildup and constitutional revision agenda. So for Korea faces a compound strategic environment. The US-Japan-China triangular dynamics interact simultaneously with North Korean issues and supply chain pressure and domestic political constraints. So, therefore, the strategic imperatives. The Korea must build a multi-layered strategy, combining self-reliance, institutionalized alliance with the United States, and value-based solidarity. So, treating the US-Japan-China triangle as an integrated strategic environment is very essential to find the Korea's strategic approach. So in the US-China-Japan triangle structure, Korea must simultaneously secure autonomy and connectivity through a strategy that combines self-reliance with alliance and solidarity. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Oh. And I think, this is the best review of Sino-Japanese relations up to this point. And I think Professor Son Dae-kwon, his job is very daunting because, the Professor Oh's presentation is kind of book length. Okay, we will start our discussion. Let me start with Yoon Dae-yeol from Daejeon University. So don't go over 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Yeah, because
Professor Choi Young-jong.
Okay.
And thank you for the organizer of this wonderful panel, inviting me as a discussant of Professor Kawashima Shin. And I would like to express my appreciation with Professor Kawashima Shin for providing insightful assessment of their achievement and challenge facing Japan, China, and Korea-Japan and trilateral relations in an area of strategic competition among US, China, and Russia. Professor Kawashima's balanced assessments can be summarized into 3 key points. Number 1, although tension between Japan and China have intensified since the inauguration of Takaichi administration, it does not necessarily mean a fundamental transformation of Japan's China policy. Second, while the Trump factor in good manner, Trump risk in real terms, bring improvement of Korea-Japan relations, but strategic foundation of bilateral cooperation still remain uncertain. And third, and perhaps most importantly, despite persistent political and security tensions, Northeast Asia requires institutionalized crisis management mechanism based on structural foundation of interdependence to sustain regional stability. Basically, I fully agree with Professor Kawashima's insightful presentation. I would like to raise 3 questions regarding the transformative nature of Takaichi Cabinet's national strategy. Number 2, future task of Korea-Japan cooperation for the regional stability. And lastly, about the geopolitics of the AI transformation that intensifying bloc-based competition and weaponized interdependence. My first question is about the nature of national strategy pursued by the Takaichi administration. You emphasized the fundamental continuity of Japan's China policy despite the recent deterioration of Japan-China relations. But however, I would like to point out whether the national strategy of the Takaichi cabinet represents something more than significant strategic transformation. Since taking office in 2025, Takaichi cabinet has articulated a comprehensive national strategy that integrates DIMT, diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic security, and technological innovation. The more detailed policy initiatives announced early this year, just after historical victory in the general election, that seeks to connect economic security, defense industrial policy, artificial intelligence, data governance, and supply chain resilience, and multilateral security cooperation also. I personally define this kind of strategic change as a nexus statecraft that combine DIMT at the one platform. In my view, Takaichi Cabinet's national strategy represents more than a continuation of the Abe administration's post-war regime strategy. Rather, it reflects new strategic paradigm that seek to construct comprehensive national power 쏘고 꼬꾸렸고 by integrating the IMT element and so on. From this perspective, Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks regarding Taiwan contingency may be interpreted not as a personal mistake, but deliberate, intentional strategic signal. Furthermore, her active promotion of quasi-alliance cooperation with Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom and like-minded countries suggests that Japan's security-centered diplomacy is entering a totally new phase. So my question is this: do you think the Takaichi administration's as a continuation of post-Abe strategy or a fundamental shift toward what I described as a nexus statecraft, combining, integrating IMT? My second question is about Korea-Japan relations in the context of Takaichi cabinet's nexus statecraft. Recent developments in bilateral relations has been very encouraging. 6 times of shuttle diplomacy between two leaders have become institutionalized. Historical and territorial disputes have been managed effectively, and practical cooperation has expanded in areas such as supply chain resilience and energy security. However, from the perspective of Takaichi cabinet's IMT strategy, nexus statecraft, Korea-Japan cooperation still appears limited in scope. There has been only modest progress in critical areas such as data sharing, intelligence cooperation, AI and digital infrastructure, defense industrial collaboration. Moreover, despite sharing common security threat from nuclear-armed North Korea, growing strategic cooperation among North Korea, China, and Russia, and even Trump risk, security cooperation between Korea and Japan has not advanced. There is a good example. At this year's Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Japanese Defense Minister Koizumi proposed expanding cooperation in AXA, the Acquisition and Cross-Service Agreement, but Korean Defense Minister and even the President oppose because domestic political and societal constraints. How do you evaluate this kind of selective and limited cooperation between Korea and Japan in the context of Takaichi cabinet's nexus statecraft? What do you suggest the most important tasks for the transforming bilateral relations into more strategic and institutionalized partnership? My final question concerns the geopolitics of AI transformation and the future of trilateral cooperation based on interdependence. You emphasize the importance of bilateral and multilateral crisis management mechanism despite political tension and strategic competition. I strongly agree with that. Economic interdependence and institutionalized cooperation have long been served as a foundation of stability in East Asia. However, in the emerging area of AI-driven geopolitical competition, interdependence itself may be increasingly become a source of rivalry and conflict. At the core of AI competition lies the construction of digital infrastructure capable of generating, collecting, processing, and utilizing data. Yet data is no longer only economic goods. It has become a strategic asset directly linked to the national security. A competition over semiconductor, AI chips, cloud computing, digital platforms, 5G networks, namely AI full stack, is evolving into new form of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnical competition that integrate diplomacy, intelligence, military, economic, and technology. Under these transformative environment, interdependence may function less as a foundation for cooperation, more as an instrument of influence and coercion. Simply, we are living in an era of weaponized interdependence. Do you believe that Japan, China, and Korea cooperation can continue to develop on the basis of economic interdependence? How do you think realistic views that AI transformation, accelerating federated technological bloc, strategic fragmentation, thereby narrowing the space for regional cooperation based on interdependence? Thank you very much.
Okay, Professor Yoon Dae-yeop raised very, very interesting questions, and I think it is Professor Kawashima needs some time to think about. And in the meanwhile, we are going to invite Kang Soo-jung from Joseon University to discuss about Kim Sun-il's paper. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Professor Choi. And I'd like to thank all three presenters for the rich and thought-provoking presentations in this panel. And I'm really glad to serve as discussant for the Professor Kim's presentation today. And I see Professor Kim's presentation not only as important contribution in its own right, but also as one that helps synthesize and advance the broader discussion of this panel. So I should also note that I'm broadly persuaded by the central arguments provided by Professor Kim. So rather than challenging the overall framework, I'd like to raise 4 questions in the spirit of constructive engagement. Okay. So let me begin with the first issue. The counterpiece of Professor Kim's framework is a 2-track strategy. On the one hand, there is a value-based coalitional track anchored in US-Japan-Korea cooperation. And on the other hand, there is a rule-based inclusive track centered on trilateral cooperation, while still keeping China engaged so that it restrains incentive to invest in regional stability. I find the conceptual coherence of this design highly impressive, but the practical question is whether the mutual insulation of these 2 tracks can actually be sustained. The difficulty, as I see it, lies in China's strategic logic. Professor Oh presented today China's strategic legitimacy appears to be deeply grounded in its role as the guardians of the post-1945 settlement. If that is correct, then developments such as Japan's military building, the deepening of US-Japan Korea cooperation, or a statement related to Taiwan contingencies may be perceived as not merely as security concerns. They may be understood as challenge to the legitimacy architecture that undefines China's regional positions. So China may have structural incentive to treat the 2 tracks as linked rather than isolated. So we can already see some empirical indications of this. In recent years, China's measures such as export controls, import restrictions, travel advisories, and the suspension of cultural exchanges have often targeted economic and social domains rather than purely military ones. These are the areas that the framework seeks to preserve within the rule-based inclusive track. So at the same time, however, China also has reasons to preserve some degree of compartmentalization. It continues to depend on regional economic stability and export market, and it has interest in being seen as responsible stakeholder in multilateral frameworks such as RCEP. This suggests China's behavior may not be entirely predetermined. It may also be reactive and situational. So my question to Professor Kim is this. So do you think China's tendency to link the two track as structurally embedded or as more reactive or situational? And if it is at least partly situational, what mechanisms might raise the cost of linkage behavior enough to make selective compartmentalization strategically rational for Beijing? Second issue, Professor Kim suggested Japan and South Korea should position themselves not as order taker, but as order maker. In this vision, they would anchor deterrence through US-Japan-Korea cooperation, preserve economic cooperation through the trilateral frame, and help keep the China, Russia, North Korea alignment from hardening into consolidated bloc. This is elegant and ambitious vision, but it depends on critical promise that Japan and South Korea can act as coherent and strategically aligned partners. Here, the other presentation in this panel suggests a more complicated picture. And Professor Kawashima's presentation showed Japan appears to be moving toward a more integrated and assertive national strategy. South Korea, by contrast, continued to operate under more complex constraints. It faced the dual challenge of deepening alliance cooperation with the United States while managing a difficult and unavoidable relationship with China. This is further complicated by domestic political polarization, which limits the space for stable strategic cooperation. So this raises a central question. Are Japan and South Korea genuinely emerging as a co-architect of a shared regional order, or is their current alignment better understood as a temporary convergence shaped by common external pressure? So my question is, So do you see Japan and South Korea as sharing a sufficiently deep and durable strategic vision to function as joint order makers? Or is the current alignment still too contingent, driven more by short-term uncertainty rather than by a consolidated strategic convergence? And if deeper alignment is possible, what institutional and political mechanism would be necessary to sustain it? And third issue, this is a dimension that all three presentations have touched upon, but perhaps not fully confronted. What concerns me here is the gap between elite-level cooperation and mass public opinion. And the data presented by Professor Kawashima was quite revealing. Negative perception remain high across the region. In South Korea as well, both anti-Japan, anti-China sentiment continue to be politically mobilized. And Professor Kim also noted that the broader nationalist tone across all three societies. And the picture, of course, mixed. Japan-Korea relations has improved in recent years. Economic interdependence remains significant across all three bilateral relationships. But the key question is whether these positive developments are strong enough to sustain long-term cooperation. In domestic context, functional cooperation remains vulnerable to rapid polarization, and this matters directly for the sustainability of more depolarized form of functional institutionalism. Even if institutional cooperation processes at the elite level, its long-term stability may remain limited if it lacks a sufficient strong social foundation. So, and this also concerns this concern also extends the track to diplomacy and epistemic communities. Their effectiveness depends not only on producing expert in a consensus, but also on their ability to connect with domestic political processes and wider public spheres. So my question to Professor Kim is functional cooperation remains vulnerable to politicization? How can track-to network and epistemic communities be connected more effectively to domestic public spheres and actual policy processes? And last issue, the framework assume that economic interdependence can anchor cooperation even when political relations are strained. The principle of de-risking, not decoupling, is central to this argument. I find this logic prescriptive and persuasive in principle, but the underlying economic structure may be changing in ways that complicate that promise. In the earlier phase of East Asian economic cooperation, the trilateral cooperation rested on complementarity. But however, the three countries are increasingly competing in the same strategic sectors, including semiconductor, batteries, electric vehicles, solar energy, and artificial intelligence. At the same time, economic policy is becoming more close linked to national security. The growing prominence of economic security discourse and legislation across the three countries reflects this change. And this creates an important tension. What exactly is the boundary between de-risking and decoupling, and to what point does risk management become strategic separation? This is also a broader concern, and the language of economic security itself may legitimize policies that narrow the space for cooperation, even while formally endorsing it. So in that sense, the problem may not only be competition itself, but the political vocabulary through which competition is justified and institutionalized. So my question to Professor Kim is, do you see the boundary between de-risking and de facto decoupling? And where do you see the boundary between the de-risking and de facto decoupling? And is there a risk that the discourse of economic security itself may gradually narrow the space for functional cooperation by legitimizing forms of industrial nationalism or strategic protectionism? That's all I prepared today, and thank you again for the great presentation provided by Professor Kim. Thank you.
Interesting that, in this session, presenters prepared PPT slides and discussant prepared actual papers. So it is, let's see, whether this kind of, strange situation will continue. Professor Son Dae-kwon from Sogang University.
Unfortunately, I didn't really prepare my PPT slide. By the way, first of all, I would like to first express my gratitude to all three presenters today. All of them offered very timely and rigorous analysis of the trilateral relations between South Korea, China, and Japan. And I particularly enjoyed the presentation by Professor Oh, and I'm a big fan of her. And I generally agree with all the analysis provided by Professor Oh. Against the backdrop of my broad agreement, I would like to ask three different questions about her presentations. One is about China, another one is about Japan, and the last one is about South Korea. So, first of all, when it comes to China, Professor Oh aptly pointed out that Chinese coercive measure is actually strengthening the Prime Minister Takaichi's domestic legitimacy. This is the phenomenon that she described as coercion paradox, and I completely agree with this view. And Chinese coercion is actually helping Dakkaichi to garner domestic support. One interesting thing regarding this issue is that this is not the first case. Actually, we can think of the many other cases of the Chinese coercion backfiring. For example, during the Koizumi era, Chinese pressure also backfired by helping Koizumi to garner domestic support. And also during the second Abe era, China put huge pressure on Japan for its decision to nationalize Senkaku or Diaoyu Island. And that pressure also backfired. As a result, both Koizumi and Abe were able to enjoy exceptionally long tenure as a prime minister. So we do have quite long historical record of Chinese coercion backfiring. If we include the cross-strait relations here, we can actually have more longer historical record. It is usually said that President Tsai Ing-wen was able to win the second election. She was, able to be re-elected as a new second president, mainly thanks to the Beijing's draconian crackdown on the Hong Kong protest. So we do have historical record, and I personally think that Chinese leaders are very well aware of this historical record. They are aware of the possibility of the coercion backfiring. As far as I know, Chinese leaders are very smart, and they are very sensitive to the international affairs. So I believe they must be really well aware of these possibility of the backfiring. So in this sense, I would like to ask about the rationale behind Chinese repeated use of the coercive tactic, which has already been proven to be counterproductive. So, what do you think is the reason why China continued to rely on these coercive measures? That's my first question about China. My second question is about Japan and Japanese expanding role in the security issues in the region, Asia Pacific. As far as I know, in the past, Japan was quite reluctant to take a larger role in terms of the Asian security. So in order to restrain its military aspiration or ambition, it built its own domestic norms and rules that curb its militarization. And those self-inflicted or self-imposed restraint serve as an insurance mechanism for Japanese neighbors, namely South Korea and China. Problem is that recently Japan is actively dismantling all those self-imposed restrictions. I'm not trying to say that Japan is pursuing militarization, or I'm not trying to say that Japanese militarism has been restored. Instead, I would like to point out that the reassurance mechanism has been significantly weakened. Under the current circumstances, it is quite understandable that China and South Korea feel alarmed, if not threatened, by gradual changes in the Japanese military postures. So I would like to ask, how do you assess the Japanese military postures, and what kind of specific step that Japan needs to take to reassure its neighboring countries? And my third question is about South Korea. And I personally feel that ROK-US alliance is becoming increasingly similar to the US-Japan alliance. The United States signed the alliance treaty with Japan as early as 1951, and the main purpose was to use Japanese territory as a platform to project its power externally in Northeast Asia or in Asia Pacific region. So during the colder era, Japan has worried significantly about the possibility of the entrapment. But the case of the ROK-US alliance was completely different. When Washington signed an alliance treaty with Seoul, it didn't really have the intention to use US bases in the South Korea for the sake of the broad regional security. So during the colder era, South Korea didn't really worry much about the possibility of the entrapment. Instead, it worried about the possibility of being abandoned. So there was the typical forms of the alliance dilemma for South Korea. But recently, as everybody knows, the United States has repeatedly expressed its willingness to use South Korea for the sake of the broader regional security, especially to tackle Chinese threat. So now South Korea begin to worry about the entrapment risk. So in this sense, I just said that ROK-US alliance is becoming increasingly similar to the US-Japan alliance. Problem is that since, in the case of Japan, since entrapment fear has haunted Japan throughout the entire colder era, so Japan has developed some mechanism to manage the entrapment risk. The typical case is the prior consultation agreement between Japan and the United States. But in the case of the South Korea, we do not really have that mechanism. So in this sense, I would like to say that South Korea now is very vulnerable to the entrapment. We may be entangled into a Washington's war unnecessarily, which was the case of the many many U.S. allies in the Middle East. They had to suffer Iranian attack simply because they host U.S. military bases. So against this backdrop, I would like to ask a question of what kind of mechanism does South Korea need to build to manage the entrapment risk while maintaining so-called ironclad alliance with the United States? And what kind of bargaining leverages are available to South Korea? So that was my questions about South Korea, and your answers and comment on these questions will be highly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Sun Tae-kwon again, he wrote a paper. So it's kind of, the question is big and important. So don't try to answer fully, and briefly outline your answer, okay? So please make your answer short in 2 to 3 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes. Wow.
Yes. So wrote separate paper, Okay, Professor Kawashima. Okay.
Yes, it's very challenging to answer the excellent questions in 2 or 3 minutes. But anyway, yeah, first question. Yeah, thank you so much. But, yeah, Professor Yoon Diop. Yes, first question. Yeah, if PM Takaichi hears your question, she will be so happy. Yeah, maybe you overestimate Takaichi-san, I think. Yeah, so yeah, her policy is the post-survey, or she creates much more advanced policy. It's clear. Yes, as I said, the outer or external conditions provide her to provide these policies. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's clear. So it is not her own policy, original policy itself. Circumstances are changing so fast, I think. Trump administration, Ukraine war, and China's activities, okay? Somebody mentioned about the Senkaku problem 15 years ago, but at the time, They know in 2008, December 8th, okay, on that day, Chinese public vessels entered the territorial waters of Senkaku Island. That's the first time. So China changed the situation in 2008, but the Chinese propaganda said Japan changed. Japan nationalized these islands or something. China changed the discourses on it. Last December, Takaichi changed its policy toward Taiwan? No. But China propaganda is Japan adopts the new militarism and so on. It's the same. So now the Chinese expansion is getting more harder and harder. Takaichi is compelled to change its policy. But Takaichi changed policy. This new policy it will be criticized by China as new militarism, like security dilemma, I think. Yes, and also Nexus statecraft or comprehensive statecraft is a very, very interesting concept. It might be interesting to compare it with the Chinese comprehensive approach to security, 综合安全观 in Chinese. Yes, anyway, every country adopts the same policy, comprehensive security policy. Because we are now facing with the AI problem, another problem, so we must combine all of the security issues relating to economy, environmental issues, and so on. So we cannot separate economy and security or military issues. So Nexus or comprehensive statecraft will be also essential for all of countries, I think. So Takaichi, she is not a creator, I think. I think. Yeah. Second question is, I agree with your second question. Yeah, it's a big problem. So as I said, a cooperation between ROK and Japan, what can we do? Yeah, Japan proposed much more, I don't know, assertive or positive proposal to ROK, but ROK sometimes cannot catch up or cannot accept it because of so many problems in domestic issues or relations with North Korea or and so on. Anyway, so it is so difficult challenging for us to share the perspective toward the international affairs or the security circumstances on this Western Pacific. For example, Taiwan issue. Yeah, for Japan, Yonaguni Island is close to Taiwan. Yeah, more close than Okinawa main island. So Taiwan issue is so crucial for Japan. But are you okay? Maybe not. Not far from. Okay, so the perspective is different, we know. So how do we share such a perspective and any project? But it's not difficult. It's impossible for us to share all of programs, all of projects by each, I think. So I mentioned about energy cooperation. So we can select or we can explore some cases one by one, step by step, I think. This is our new challenges. And finally, AI. It's interesting. So as I said, yes, AI and this economic security, these new situations will advance decoupling. Yeah, that's right, economic statecraft and so on, as Professor Kim said. That's right. However, it is impossible for us to advance decoupling all of field of economy. Yeah. So semiconductor and some rare earths and so on. These fields must be decoupled, I think. However, how about the production of socks, jackets? So this is okay, no problem. So so-called dependence will be continued next year, 2 years later, and so on. So how do we explore the new situation, new cooperation, new order on economic mutual dependence, reliance, and how do we explore the new rule-based order in this region. Yeah. And also, we advanced some AI, order on AI and others, as the RCEP or CPTPP or the multilateral framework, I think, is my challenge. Thank you so much.
Okay, Professor Kim, and please make it short.
Thank you very much, Professor Kang, for your great and the helpful comments. And I was pleasantly surprised by the 6 pages of review on my 30 pages of PowerPoint slides, and as Professor Che noticed. And so in responding to your the comments that I believe in the power of institution, and the once it's established, it will work as a safeguard against fundamental disruptions. The economic interdependence has also played out, constraining individual nations' kind of foreign policy making. And for example, recently, 2 Chinese scholars, if I remember correctly, Wang and Li, they elaborate the idea of so-called hard wedging and soft wedging, and China has been oscillating between them. And from their findings, we can see that those punitive actions of China, or sanctions or retaliations, cannot last that long. And the nations are likely to find a new equilibrium by compartmentalizing the issue areas. As in the case of the THAAD in Korea, the THAAD deployment in South Korea, which is now largely taken for granted. Of course, China officially opposing it, but that might be a sign of new equilibrium. China's admitting the security interests of South Korea while expressing interest in keeping engaged in other forms of cooperation. Here I want to underscore the significance of domestic matters again. The political leadership and domestic political factions play a critical role in fostering and disintegrating the emerging new institutional equilibrium. And recently, Japan decided to allow United States deployment of advanced air defense system, which is obviously aiming China in Okinawa, which is a decision that will definitely disrupt the institution building process in the region. And I wondered, had Japan had more moderate political leader, that kind of decision might have not been made, whatever the United States demands. Here we also have to admit that it is not only Trump administration, but Biden and Obama administrations all imposed similar pressures on Japan. And political leadership is a matter of changing political environment and constituency. There's nothing to add on that. And having Takaichi as the prime minister in Japan and continuing to have Xi Jinping as the president in China and having had the Yoon Suk-yeol as the president of South Korea is all the outcome of the changing constituency and domestic political environment. So on the question of the order-making capability of Japan and South Korea as middle powers, and as well as the third questions of the elite mass gap, I also want to underscore the significance of domestic political environment and social conditions. The rise of antagonistic sentiment among the trilaterals have undergone changes, as Professor Kawashima pointed out, and it is also the change in the case in South Korea when under the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government, the mutual sentiment got soured between China and South Korea, while that of the Korea and Japan was kind of deteriorated under the previous Moon Jae-in government. Had Japan had, for example, Ishiba as the prime minister, I'm sure he would not have brought about Taiwan issue from the beginning. That may demonstrate that without addressing fundamental domestic and social and political issues, diplomatic solutions to build cooperation may be substantially limited. Finally, I think your final comments also in line with that. The rise of economic nationalism is coupled with the decline in support for the globalization and economic cooperation across borders. So Trump's strong anti-globalization drive demonstrate that too. And addressing domestic issue of economic and social inequality, which may allow the people of the trilateral to kind of change their view on international cooperation and international exchange. I believe that might be a kind of step to mitigate the devastating and zero-sum head-to-head confrontation among the three nations. Thank you very much.
Okay, Professor O,
Yeah.
make it short again.
Okay. First, let me thank Professor Son for his thoughtful and insightful comments. Let me briefly respond to the three major issues he raises. First, on China's continued reliance on coercive statecraft despite its tendency to backfire. Professor Son mentioned in the discussion paper, first, the domestic political imperatives, and second, the indirect deterrence signaling toward third parties. Third, the bureaucratic pathologies within the foreign policy apparatus. So I think all three explanations suggested by the discussant have merit, but if I had to choose, identify the most important one, I would emphasize the domestic political imperatives. On issues involving sovereignty and territorial integrity, particularly Taiwan, the Chinese leadership faces significant domestic pressure to demonstrate resolve. In that sense, coercive measures are often directly directed not only the target state, but also at domestic audiences and third parties. So as for the prospect for the de-escalation under the Takaichi administration, I am somewhat pessimistic. The current tensions reflect not simply a dispute over a particular statement, but deeper disagreement over Taiwan and regional order and the future security architecture of East Asia. So adopting, as Kawashima and Professor Kawashima Shin suggested, separating economic from politics among bilateral or trilateral relations can be one of the possibility, even though there are a lot of pessimistic perspective in the bilateral relations. And second, regarding Japan's expanding security law, my paper does not seek to judge whether Japan's transformation is normatively desirable. Rather, it seeks to explain why it is occurring and why it generates concern in China. From Tokyo's perspective, many of these reforms can be understood as responses to China's military rise and a deteriorating regional security environment. At the same time, neighboring countries interpret these developments through the lens of historical memory as well as current intentions. Therefore, even if Japan views its policies as defensive, a regional anxiety may persist. This makes transparency and strategic dialogue and confidence-building measures particularly important. And third, on South Korea's alliance dilemma, I largely agree with the discussant that the balance between abandonment and entrapment concerns may be gradually shifting. Traditionally, South Korea has worried far more about abandonment, but regional contingencies beyond the Korean peninsula are making entrapment risks increasingly irrelevant. The objective, however, should not be to eliminate such risks entirely, but to manage them more effectively. This suggests the need for stronger consultation mechanism within the alliance, greater clarity regarding the regional employment of U.S. Forces Korea, and continued efforts to strengthen South Korea's own defense capabilities. The greater autonomy and stronger alliance management should be seen as complementary rather than contradictory goals. So Japan and South Korea need to combine self-reliance with alliance with the United States and the solidarity. Once again, I sincerely appreciate the discussant's constructive comments, and the issue he has raised point to important directions for future research, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with Professor Son and our panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Time is running out. Although we lost huge segment of our expected audience to soccer, still we had very productive and interesting session, and thank you all, your presenters and discussants and audience. Thank you for your contribution, and I hope South Korea win the match. Losing the match. Okay, so it is fortunate, you know. Oh, okay, good. So we had an wonderful session. Yeah. Thank you. This is it. Okay.